Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into some truly fascinating source material that bridges ancient history, mind-bending astrophysics, and tactical spiritual warfare. And the focal point of all this? The teachings of Lady Janice. You see, what stands out immediately in these texts is that Lady Janice is absolutely not afraid to boldly share the unvarnished truth of God's Word. These materials are uncompromising, and they reveal a gripping perspective on what this source argues is actually happening in our world right now.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We're going to move from uncovering mysteries in the stars and ancient scrolls to discovering the precision of Aramaic weaponry. Then we'll reframe how we view spiritual victory, and finally look at the ultimate eternal choice presented in these texts. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. Truth God isn't afraid of. Uncovering evidence in the stars and the scrolls. So the foundational premise of this material is simply this: God is absolutely not afraid of evidence. Take this brilliant quote from Sir Fred Hoyle. Now, he was a highly respected astrophysicist and actually a lifelong atheist. But when he set out to study the carbon atom, he discovered that its nuclear energy level has to be calibrated to an impossibly precise degree, literally within 0.5%, for life to even exist. As he put it, it's as if a superintelligence just monkeyed with physics. The text uses this to show that even the hardest, most rigorous sciences point straight to a creator who perfectly and intentionally calibrated this universe. But the text points out that this evidence isn't just floating out there in the stars, it's right here in human behavior. Get this. Every single month, a staggering 16.6 million people type the exact phrase, "What is sin?" into search engines, month in, month out. Think about that volume. The source material highlights this to show that humanity undeniably feels this deep, aching gap between who they are and who they desperately want to be. People are literally searching for a name for this gap. Well, the ancient texts actually give it a name. When we look at the original Aramaic and Hebrew, the word for sin is chatat, and it's actually an archery term. It doesn't just imply malice, it practically means shooting an arrow and completely missing the target. To put it in biblical numerology, the number 6 represents humanity, and 7 represents divine completion or covenant rest. So the text explains that sin is basically the limitation of a 6, trying so hard to reach the perfection of a 7 without the Creator. You're aiming for completion, but you just keep falling short. Okay, moving on to Section 2, Unsealing the Ancient Manuals, the War Scroll and the Book of Jubilees. Now, the source material takes us deep into the hidden intelligence found in ancient texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Enoch, and it argues that these aren't just dusty relics, they're actual prophetic manuals meant for right now. The Book of Jubilees, for example, gives us this incredibly precise timeline. It details how around the year 461 from creation, right during Enoch's lifetime, 200 angelic beings known as the Watchers totally rebelled. They descended to earth and corrupted humanity. The text even argues the Great Flood wasn't just punishment, but a literal genetic reset. And here's the wild part. That timeline connects directly to today. From the rebirth of Israel in 1948, leading right up to 2025, the source claims the prophecy clock has restarted, arguing that the ancient demonic rebellion we read about perfectly parallels the accelerating spiritual activity we're seeing today. Which brings us to the War Scroll. Discovered back in 1947, a lot of scholars just call it a piece of historical fantasy written by some desert monks. But our source material completely flips that script. It reveals that the War Scroll is actually a decoded military intelligence manual for end times warfare. It details highly specific military formations, like a sophisticated 7-line deep troop deployment, and it even describes modern-sounding weapons, like automatic burst-fire mechanisms, but using ancient vocabulary. The argument here is that God intentionally orchestrated its preservation in a cave for exactly this modern generation. Section 3. Aramaic, the precision weapon, discovering the original language of authority. Now, this next point is absolutely crucial. The source points out that translating the Bible into English often totally diluted its original, potent meaning. And true to her form of boldly sharing the truth, Lady Janice highlights that returning to Jesus' native language is the key to unlocking real spiritual authority. When Jesus cried out on the cross, he used Aramaic. That was the language he spoke, the language he healed people with, and the exact language he used to cast out demons. The text makes the case that speaking these original words activates a level of legal authority that Greek or English translations have unintentionally watered down over the centuries. Let's look at an example. Take the word for blood. In Aramaic, it's deme. The text explains that this isn't just a physical descriptor, it carries full-blown legal meaning. We're talking about a life force, a covenant seal, and an absolute legal payment that completely cancels a debt. So the point the source drags home is that when you use the concept of dema in spiritual warfare, you aren't just defensively pleading. No, you are legally applying a canceled debt directly against the enemy. You are enforcing a hard legal reality. And the source text actually organizes these enemy forces into a highly specific hierarchy, categorizing them by their exact operational functions. At the very top, you have Satana, the supreme commander. Below that are Sharutesh, which act as territorial princes over entire nations. Then down to Shultane, controlling cultural ideologies. And finally, Shedi, which are the more common demons causing personal afflictions. The text emphasizes that you absolutely must classify the enemy before commanding them. I mean, you wouldn't fight a territorial prince the same way you'd fight a common personal affliction, right? Precision is everything here.
Section 4. Fighting from Finished Victory, the Concept of Rest Warfare. This brilliantly sets up our next section. The source material tells us we literally need to rewire our entire understanding of spiritual warfare based on what was fully accomplished at Calvary. Think about it. For so long, so many of us have been taught to fight for victory. Begging, striving, getting totally exhausted, just hoping to win the battle. But the text boldly explains that we need to fight from a finished victory. According to this framework, you are already seated with Christ above the enemy. You are simply enforcing an existing law, kind of like a police officer holding up a badge, rather than fighting a toe-to-toe fistfight hoping you're the stronger one. The source calls this incredible concept rest warfare. So what does this look like in practice? According to the texts, your exact tactical protocol for 2025 involves 3 distinct steps. Step 1, you declare your positional authority seated with Christ. Step 2, you use that precise Aramaic command language we talked about, words like shtak to silence the enemy, and pukan to completely expel them. And step 3, you enforce the legal payment of the blood, the demei Yeshua. In this framework, it's simple but powerful. You silence, you expel, and you legally enforce.
Section 5. The ultimate eternal choice. Eternity is forever. Ultimately, all of this hidden intelligence, the ancient scrolls, and these specific Aramaic warfare protocols, they all point toward what the source describes as one unavoidable reality. And Lady Janice's material is entirely uncompromising here, asserting that eternity lasts forever and that the grace period we're currently living in is rapidly ending. The text frames heaven and hell not as abstract metaphors, but as literal, concrete destinations. It argues that no matter how much you know about ancient scrolls or cool spiritual warfare tactics, your eternity comes down to a single, bold choice. Will you accept the finished work of Christ?
The manuals have been unsealed. The concept of the staggering authority has been laid out clearly by the source material, and that leaves us with a massive, vital question to consider. If these ancient texts truly hold the decoded manual for the spiritual battles of 2025, how will you use this authority today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep digging into the truth.